This joint assembly is convened in accordance with the provisions of J.R.S. 2, which the clerk will now read.
To receive the report of the committee appointed to canvass votes for state officers. Resolved by the Senate and House of Representatives that the two houses meet in joint assembly on Thursday, January 9, 2025 at 10 o'clock in the forenoon to receive the report of the joint canvassing committee appointed to canvass votes for governor, lieutenant governor, state treasurer, secretary of state, auditor of accounts, and attorney general. And if it shall be declared by said committee that there have been no election by the voters of any of the said state officers, then to proceed forthwith to elect such officers as have not been elected by the voters.
Thank you. Before we begin, I wanted to talk about our expectations in regard to the decorum of the chamber. I would ask that everyone please turn cell phones off. These proceedings are of the utmost importance. Please respect the integrity of the process. While this is the people's house and you, the public, have every right to be here, there are rules that must be followed. Outbursts of any sort will not be tolerated. Only legislators are allowed to speak during these proceedings. Only legislators are allowed on the floor of the chamber. Members of the public, please stay in the back of the chamber and the balcony. And once the ballots start to be passed out, no one will be permitted to enter the chamber. If you choose to leave, you will not be allowed to re-enter. The chair will now recognize the co-chair of the Joint Canvassing Committee appointed to canvass votes for state officers, the senator from Addison District, Senator Hardy, for the purpose of receiving the report of the committee.
Thank you, Mr. President. Bear with me, this is long. On January 8th, 2025, the Joint Canvassing Committee appointed by the Senate and House of Representatives to canvass the votes for governor, lieutenant governor, state treasurer, secretary of state, auditor of accounts, and attorney general respectfully reports that having been duly sworn, it has attended to the duties of its trust and finds the number of votes to have been: for governor, total votes cast for governor, 362,841. Necessary to have a major part of the votes, 181,421. Esther Charleston of Middlebury, a Democrat progressive, 79,217. June Goodband of Springfield of the Peace and Justice Party, 4,512. Kevin Hoyt of Bennington, an independent, 9,368. Eli Poa Mutina of Berry City, an independent, 2,414. Phil Scott of Berlin, a Republican, 266,439. There were 891 write-in votes. And agreeable to the constitutional provisions, it hereby declares Phil Scott, who received a major part of the votes, to be governor of the state of Vermont for the 2 next years ensuing. For lieutenant governor, total votes cast for lieutenant governor, 352,414 votes. Necessary to have a major part of the votes, 176,208. Ian Diamondstone of Putney and the Peace and Justice Party, 13,671. John S. Rogers of Glover, a Republican, 171,854. David Zuckerman of Heinsberg, a Progressive Democrat, 165,876. And there were 1,013 write-ins. And agreeable to the constitutional provisions, it hereby declares no one received a major part of the vote to be lieutenant governor of the state of Vermont. And the General Assembly shall select from the 3 candidates who received the most votes. For state treasurer, total votes cast for state treasurer, 347,312. Necessary to have a major part of the votes, 173,657. Joshua Beckhofer of Cornwall, a Republican, 135,763. Mike Pichek of Winooski, a Democrat, 211,134, and there were 415 write-ins. And agreeable to the constitutional provisions, it hereby declares Mike Pichek, who received a major part of the votes, to be the state treasurer of the state of Vermont for the next 2 years ensuing. For Secretary of State, total votes cast for Secretary of State, 344,524. Plurality, not a major part of the vote, is required. Sarah Copeland Hansis of Bradford, a Democrat, 205,378. H. Brooke Page of Washington, a Republican, 138,673. There were 473 write-ins. And agreeable to the constitutional provisions, it hereby declares Sarah Copeland Hansis, who received the greatest parts of the vote, to be Secretary of State of the state of Vermont for the next 2 years ensuing. For Auditor of Accounts, total votes cast for Auditor of Accounts, 341,793. Plurality, not a major part of the vote, is required. Doug Hoffer of Burlington, Democrat Progressive, 207,195 votes. H. Brooke Page of Washington, Republican, 134,066 votes. And there were 532 write-ins. And agreeable to the constitutional provisions, it hereby declares Doug Hoffer, who received the greatest parts of the votes, to be Auditor of Accounts of the state of Vermont for the next 2 years ensuing. For Attorney General, total votes cast for Attorney General, 347,158. Plurality, not a major part of the vote, is required. Charity R. Clark of Williston, Democratic, 200,711 votes. Kevin Gustafson of Rutland Town and the Peace of Justice Party, 17,159 votes. Torrey Nelson of Berlin, a Republican, 128,798 votes, and there were 490 votes. Write-in votes, excuse me. And agreeable to the constitutional and statutory provisions, it hereby declares Charity Clark, who received the greatest part of the votes, to be Attorney General of the state of Vermont for the next 2 years ensuing. This report containing the results of the vote for each statewide office is respectfully submitted to the Senate and House of Representatives at the State House in Montpelier, Vermont on the 9th day of January, 2025 by the Joint Canvassing Committee. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator. The chair will now recognize the member from Vergennes, Representative Byron, co-chair of the committee, for the purpose of making a motion.
The member from Vergennes moves that the report of the Joint Canvassing Committee be adopted by this joint assembly.
Now the motion has been made that this joint assembly adopt the report of the Joint Canvassing Committee. Are you ready for that question? If so, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed signify by saying no. The ayes have it, and the report of the Joint Canvassing Committee is adopted. The report of the Joint Canvassing Committee, which was just adopted by this joint assembly, declares that no person was elected to the office of Lieutenant Governor, since a majority vote was not attained as required by the Vermont Constitution. Pursuant to the provisions of the joint resolution which set up this joint assembly, J.R.S. 2, and the provisions of the Vermont Constitution, We will now proceed to the election of a lieutenant governor. Under the provisions of the Constitution, Chapter 2, Section 47, the voting for the office is to be done by joint ballot of this assembly from the three candidates for office who received the greatest number of votes for that office. Accordingly, for the office of lieutenant governor, you must choose among Ian G. Diamondstone, Peace and Justice Party; John S. Rogers, Republican Party; David E. Zuckerman, Progressive/Democratic Party. Accordingly, paper ballots containing the three names for the office of lieutenant governor have been prepared by the Secretary of State to accomplish this vote. We will need tellers, and the chair now appoints as tellers Senator Ruth E. Hardy of Addison as chief teller, Senator Brian P. Collmore of Rutland District, Senator Tanya C. Vihovsky of Chittenden Central District, Representative Matthew Byron, the member from Vergennes, Representative Lisa Hango, the member from Berkshire, Representative Alice Emmons, the member from Pulteney, Representative Sandra Pisano, the member from Dorset. We shall now proceed to the election of a lieutenant governor. Are you ready for the question? There being no debate, before the ballots are passed out, I want to remind you of the rules that govern us. Insofar as they are applicable, the Senate rules apply. No representative or senator may be absent from this joint assembly unless sick or otherwise necessarily detained. Upon being called to order, every representative and senator shall be seated. It is the duty of each representative and senator to vote unless excused by this joint assembly or unless he or she is directly or immediately interested in the question being voted on. You are to remain seated while the tellers distribute the ballots. If a member is not seated, no ballot will be placed at the member's desk or seat. You are to remain seated during voting and while the ballots are collected by the tellers. There is to be no milling about in the chamber during the counting of the ballots. Let me stress the no milling rule. I always hated the absolute nature of it, so maybe limited milling. You are requested to remain in your seats during the counting of the ballots unless it is necessary to step out of the chamber. If you leave the chamber during the counting of the ballots, you will be not permitted to re-enter until the counting of the ballots has been completed. For those here as members of the public, once the ballots start to be passed out, no one will be permitted to enter the chamber. If you are ready for the question, the tellers are now instructed to come forward and distribute the ballots for this office to the members of the joint assembly. Instead of my apologies to Representative Emmons, the member from Springfield. Yeah, I guess so. Does everyone have their ballots? If so, please proceed to vote and mark your ballots. And please be sure to vote for only one candidate. The tellers shall now collect the ballots and tabulate the results. Once again, during the collection and tabulation, please remain seated. That's an 8, right? John, do I bank again? Please listen to the results of your vote. Total votes cast 176, necessary for election 89. Ian G. Diamondstone, 0 votes. John S. Rogers, 158 votes. David E. Zuckerman, 18 votes. John S. Rogers, having received a majority of the total votes cast, is hereby declared duly elected to the office of Lieutenant Governor for the term of 2 years next ensuing. Congratulations, Mr. Lieutenant Governor. The purposes for which this joint assembly was convened having been accomplished, the chair now declares the same